Welcome here, Chris Bateman, the one game designer which we have been working really for 20 years. Effectively, our first game called Theoretic Kingdoms was completely designed and put together for the narrative. So I'm really happy that he's here now to talk a little bit about the Beyond Victory. So I'm actually wondering what that is as well. So please, Chris, stage is yours.
I want to take you on a journey. I want to take you on a journey where most of the places we're going to go you've already been before. And I suspect many of you know this game in one of its incarnations, Shadow of the Colossus. And there are two moments in Shadow of the Colossus that I want to single out and draw attention to. And the first of those moments is this one here, the moment you first see the Colossus, the very first of the Colossus you have to fight. It has more impact than any of the others because this is the moment that the game stamps on you what's going on. And there's an experience here in that moment, in just seeing that Colossus. I'm going to return to that moment a little bit later in this talk. But I said beyond victory, so I want to start with this question of victory. And one of the reasons that Shadow of the Colossus is loved so much is that it kicks you around, beats you to the ground, it makes you fight to win. You have to use every fiber of your being to mount to the top of each Colossus. It will smack you down. It will make you hate it. But eventually, you get to plunge your sword into the brain of this beast, and it dies. And you get a feeling, right? It's a feeling you all know. You've all played at least one game that gives you this feeling, right? It's the feeling that if you get a really strong version of it, you let out a barbaric yomp. Yes! Woo! Right? So, Fumito Ueda, who led the team on Shadow of the Colossus, said this about it. When I start playing a game, I want to get to the boss fights quickly. Fighting a boss is a really fun element in games, and I wanted to have a lot of that. In fact, what he really wanted to do was make a Zelda-like game, but they didn't have the budget for that. So they largely just focused on having boss after boss after boss after boss. But this feeling, this really fun element in games that Ueda-san draws attention to here is what emotion researchers call fiero, what I'm going to call triumph, right? It's triumph over adversity. It's that feeling of victory. And it is, of course, one of the important experiences that games give you. But in this talk, what I want to do is take us beyond victory. I want to look not only at the experience of winning, but at the other experiences that games can give us. And I think, I have a saying, everybody likes to win, but not everybody is willing to suffer to get there, right? And I'm sure there are some gamers in the room who know what I mean when I say that. So we're going to look at 10 different motives, 10 player motives that my company's been researching for many years and used as the basis for our design practice. And the first of those motives is the victory motive, the motive to win. But also we're going to look at problem solving and acquisition, luck and thrill seeking, curiosity, narrative, agency, social, horror. These are the 10 player motives I want to talk to you about today. In the center of this chart here, you see the three, what you might call hot emotions of play. These are emotions of victory one way or another, and we'll look at those first. But then there's also the experience of thrill seeking, which doesn't have to come with a win at the end. And the experience of luck, which is another way of getting to victory that doesn't always frustrate you. Curiosity, which games use in really interesting ways and is in some respects an underused aspect of games. A narrative and agency, which are closely related and in some respects conflicting. The social motive, the enjoyment we get from playing with other people. And the horror motive, letting the games take you onto dark trips. So this is the map. This is the map of the journey I want to take you on today. But who am I and why am I here? Well, I mean, Peter foreshadowed that if you were in Peter's talk by putting up a picture of me when I looked young and my liver still worked properly. But who am I? I set up a company in 1999 called International Hobo. I've worked on over 100 different games at this point, although I can only talk about and have credits in something like 70 or 80 of them. And why am I here in Koszycza? Well, this is not my first time in Koszycza, and in fact, I've shipped 12 games with companies here in Koszycza, all in liaison with Peter, although not all with Peter's company. I've worked on big million-selling games, I've worked on tiny games, I've worked on great games, I've worked on terrible games. I've worked on games I loved that nobody played. I've worked on games I hated that everybody loved. It's been fun, right? Why get into making games if you're not going to enjoy it? I won't say it's all been fun. Sometimes working with marketing departments is particularly painful, but let's save that for another talk. And I also write books. I write books for the same reason I work in games, which is that I enjoy solving problems. So first of all, I was writing books that were how-to books about how to do things in games, right? And then around 2011, I felt the need to tackle something else. I started getting into philosophy. As Terry Pratchett and I said in one of my games, Discworld Noir, I got a bad case of philosophy. I couldn't shake it. So I worked on a bunch of philosophy books, the first of which, Imaginary Games, is a defense of the claim that video games are artworks. And it's the most popular of the philosophy books. But they're all interesting in their own way. And if, in the unlikely event you have any interest in philosophy, a good place to start with my philosophy is Wikipedia Knows Nothing, because the publisher has a PDF version that they give away for free, and it's short, which is something that you won't find about many philosophy books. It's about knowledge. It's about how we know things. But it's not what I'm here to talk about today. My most recent book is this. It's the second edition of this anthology book of mine, which is easily my most successful book, Game Writing Narrative Skills for Video Games. I'm the editor of this collection, and I wrote several of the essays, but these are essays by a variety of people who work in video games. And if you work in game narrative, obviously I'm going to say this because I want to pimp this book, but this is a great guide for you if you want to understand how stories and games work together, or how they don't work together for that matter. And it's out with Bloomsbury, which is easily the biggest book publisher I've worked with as well, so I feel pretty smug about that. And they let me into the Writers and Artists Yearbook. I'm the first game writer to be given an essay in the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which really feels like a moment of smugness, actually. But not what I'm here to talk about today. So let's get back to these 10 player motives. So I suppose I should start by eliminating what I'm not talking about when I talk about 10-player motives, right? There are borderline cases that aren't really what I'm talking about when I talk about player motives, motives you have as a player of games, right? If you drink too much beer and put on weight, as I have, and you play Wii Fit to lose weight, that's a motive. It's not your motive as a player, right? That's your motive as a human being to try and lose weight using Wii Fit, right? That's a motive for playing a game. It's not a player motive as such. Likewise, if you purchase a copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator in order to learn to fly a commercial jet, perhaps you want to commit a terrorist atrocity, that is a motive. Sorry, bad taste, I know. That is a motive, but it's not a player motive, right? It's not your motive as a player of games. So I'm not going to talk about the many reasons why we might play games, other than the reasons that we play games as players, as people who want to play games, right? And I want to start in the middle of the diagram with these hot motives. And we've already seen one of these, right? But I'm going to look at it again. The victory motive. The victory motive to struggle against frustrating challenges until eventually achieving success, right? If you do not have to struggle, you do not feel the fiero, right? No Bob Eric Yomp, not even a fist bump, unless you have to fight to get there. Yeah? So the emotions that underpin this is not just the fiero, the triumph that I said before, but also anger, frustration, the experience of working with a Windows operating system, right? Although you don't get much fiero from working with Windows, I can tell you. If you get too frustrated, if the game makes you too livid and angry, you won't actually get the triumph when you get to the end of whichever challenge you're on. You'll just feel relief. Thank goodness that's over, right? That's still enjoyable. It's not a patch on getting the proper victory, right? So there's a real balancing act to be had in how much you make your players suffer before you let them win, right? If they're going to experience victory enjoyably, they have to struggle, but they have to not hate you, right? Although some players are pretty masochistic and you can really mess them about. So what am I going to pick as an example? A commercial example that uses the victory motive to show off. In fact, suggestions from the floor. Sing out a game that you would think of as an exemplar, an example of the victory motive. Anything at all? Dark Souls. Yes. Now, I can see why you would say that, but I'm actually going to go for Mario. And one of the reasons I want to go for Mario is that we often associate this experience of victory with violence and darkness and whatever else you might say, and certainly that is out there, and Dark Souls is a brilliant example. But Mario shows that if you make the player struggle fairly to achieve victory, you can pay off this victory motive and still hit an incredibly wide audience. In fact, publishers other than Nintendo are in total denial about Mario. They don't like to sign up platform games to some extent because they don't like to admit that they're not good enough to make a game like Mario. Because what Nintendo do when they make a Mario game, which almost no other publisher will do, is not release it until it's right. Because only Nintendo is willing to waste money to get games right. Every other publisher has to ship on a schedule, right? But a Mario game doesn't ship unless it's right. It's got to get you the victory. It's got to get you the triumph. But nobody should be tracking down the people who made Mario games and wanting to punch them in the face, right? It's a balancing act. Another great example of victory, fighting games. And here, because you mostly play these against other people, you're really getting that sense of one-on-one, or in Smash Brothers, 4 against 1. You're getting that sense of struggling for victory against other players. And there's another dimension to that I'll come back later. And also, obviously, sporting games. EA have made millions over the years licensing sports games, shipping largely the same game every year, right? What a nice racket that is. Sports, of course, are all about victory. Nobody supports a team in a sporting contest because they want them to lose, right? You're there because you want to share in the triumph when your team wins. In fact, if you support a team that loses for many, many years, as I do in American football, for many, many years, I supported the Philadelphia Eagles, who were just hopeless, and we all lost hope. And then we won the Super Bowl. Fiera, woo! Right? Vicarious enjoyment. And the sporting games play into that. They play into the love of triumph. So I don't want you to think when I talk about Beyond Victory that I'm devaluing the value of victory. It is one of the great moments in video games when you win, right? But it's not the only way to get there. So here's another one. It's also a way of getting to triumph. But it's very different in character. It's the problem-solving motive, to work out how to solve confusing puzzles through patient application. And not everyone wants to do this. In fact, this is wildly less popular than just suffering and winning, right? But it is something that a lot of gamers do and love, right? Overcoming problems. But this experience of confusion is tied up with it. Because the most satisfying problems to solve are those ones where initially you have no idea how to solve it. If you knew how to solve it, it wouldn't be a puzzle, right? It's the fact that you don't know what to do. It's the fact that you're confused that sets the ground for eventually beating the puzzle. And so something like Portal, I think, is a great example of this, because Portal uses a very simple toolkit. You know almost immediately in the game how you're going to solve all of the puzzles. It still doesn't help you solve any of the puzzles, right? That's an ideal situation. There's no question about how you're going to do it. You're going to do it using the portals. You've still got to do it, right? It's practically perfect. But also, strategy games and Civilization, which is actually kind of a rip-off of Francis Treffel's board game, but let's not go there. The Civilization series, although we think of this as a strategy game, this is a series of strategic problems and logistical problems and tactical problems that you solve on the fly. The systems of these games create problems for you to solve. And they're always different because of the dynamic systems at the base of the game. So these can be really satisfying because whereas a portal, once you've done it once, unless you wait a long time or drink a lot of beer, you will remember how to solve the puzzles and you won't get that experience again. Whereas every time you sit down to play Civ, you're going to get a different experience. And there are games that do a bit of both. Something like Lemmings, the classic game Lemmings. I fear the audience is too young to remember. But this is a mixture of puzzles and strategy. And there's mass market games as well. Brain Age sold this problem-solving idea to a very wide audience, an audience who, when surveyed, would say, I don't play games. There they are, sat on the DS playing Brain Age, but they don't play games. And Angry Birds is perhaps emblematic of what you can do when you get the wind behind you with a nice problem-solving experience. And the last of these three hot motives, the acquisition motive, collect everything that isn't nailed down or strive for 100% completion, right? It would be unfair to call this the greed motive, but it's pretty greedy. But this experience of acquisition, I'm sure there are people in the room, you've played a game, you don't need a power-up, you pick it up anyway, right? Because there's power-up. Doesn't matter you don't need it, it's there, right? We're conditioned to pick up everything the game throws at us. So you can actually get an experience of triumph from acquisition. It depends how it sets it up, but you're more likely to get a sort of weaker version, satisfaction. The satisfaction of a job well done, the satisfaction of 200 hours wasted chasing achievements, right? But to get to that satisfaction with the acquisition motive, you are likely to have to put up with a lot of doing the same thing over and over again. We have a name for it in games, right? Grinding. It's assumed from the name grind or grinding that this is a negative experience. Actually, when we looked at players, we found many players who just didn't care about that. As long as they get the satisfaction at the end, they'll do the grinding. In fact, we found players in player surveys who say things like, I didn't like this game, that there wasn't enough grinding, right? Sounds bizarre if grinding's a negative experience. But when you start thinking about it in terms of something like Pokemon, you might start to see why that would come together. And I think Pokemon is a brilliant example of the acquisition motive because it's right there in the best marketing tagline in the history of video games, gotta catch 'em all, right? And there's loads of things to acquire in Pokemon. There is money to acquire, there are training machines to acquire, there are badges to acquire, but nothing matches up to the satisfaction you get for completing the Pokédex, which you have to do, unfortunately, for many players who are wildly introverted, by trading with another player, although most players seem to just go and buy a second copy of the game and trade with themselves. I have a remark to make there, but it's filthy, and there might be children watching, so I'm going to keep it to myself. Ask me afterwards what I decided not to say. The other way that acquisition manifests, and it's closely related because, let's face it, Pokemon is an RPG. Games like World of Warcraft, Monster Hunter, right? These are heavily into acquisition. They're heavily into giving you things to grind through. There's other aspects to these games. All games have multiple motives behind them, but those games are indicative of what acquisition in games is about. But it doesn't have to be about fighting. In fact, the Japanese twigged this in the 90s with games like Harvest Moon. Harvest Moon, brilliantly, is a Japanese RPG in which instead of murderizing ethnic minorities for experience points, you collect turnips. Sounds like a really bad idea, right? But somehow, Zynga managed to turn this into a business model that got them hundreds of millions of venture capital money. right? Because it really was a genius idea to take that experience of acquisition that RPGs set up and remove the violence and present it in a more accessible, more friendly, more popular form. And whilst I'll be the first to admit that Zynga's game designs are wildly derivative of everyone else, as a business, you have to admire, to a certain extent, their ability to find a way to get games that would never have been played by a wide audience into the hands of those players who say, I don't play games. Okay, so those are the three hot motives, right? We've got some more to get into, but I want to make this general point. These are all motives, experiences of triumph via enduring something. You have to put up with something to get there, right? For the victory motive, you endure frustration to get to victory, right? For the problem solving, you endure confusion. And for the acquisition motive, you endure boredom, right? So as I said at the beginning, everybody likes to win, but not everybody wants to suffer to get there, right? But everyone has their own poison, right? Players who love problem solving are just not bothered by confusion because they know they're going to crack the problem, they know they're going to get it in the end, right? And stubborn bastards, when they play games that smack them down, they really want to win and they won't stop until they do. Right, but you can get to triumph without enduring anything in a game of blind luck. If you've got kids who are just young enough to start playing games, you will have realized this quite quickly. The luck motives ask that we abandon to chance in order to enjoy victory without enduring frustration. Because anyone can win. If you play Snakes and Ladders or any of those other race games that kids play, there's no obvious skill in it whatsoever, right? Somebody's going to win. It's going to be pure chance. But the great thing about it is nobody has to suffer, right? This is not a game that's going to smack you down. So here we're getting to triumph, and we're also getting a little bit of excitement. Games of chance, there's a little bit of excitement before whatever the random thing resolves. I want to get to some examples. Bejeweled may not look like a game of luck. And certainly, you could play it as a deeply tactical game, working your moves 8 in advance. But if that's what you want to do, you don't go and play Bejeweled, right? You go and play Civ. The reason Bejeweled was a huge hit for PopCap was an absolutely genius design decision that cost nothing. Well, it didn't cost nothing, but it cost next to nothing. It was the division of the game into an untimed and a timed mode. Because the majority of players who played Bejeweled were the kind of people, as I've said before, who didn't think of themselves as playing games. The timed mode was stressful, right? There was a sense of panic. Oh, I've got to do it all in time. I don't want to do that. That's too scary. That's too scary for me, right? The ticking clock. Untimed mode, no pressure whatsoever. Just flip these jewels around and eventually something will match. And if you get really lucky, because it's a very volatile game, like a lot of these puzzle games, and the gems will all cascade and fireworks will go off. Fiero! Fiero by pure chance, without a timer. Genius, genius. And PopCap got very big, taking ideas like this, which had precedence. There's a game, Panel Upon, absolutely brilliant, although devilishly difficult puzzle game out of Japan. We got it in Europe as Tetris Attack. It's my wife and I are still playing it. We've played 200 hours of that game in the last couple of years. It's the game that Bejeweled inspired, but you couldn't get a mass market audience to play it. It's too hard, right? Bizarrely, when EA purchased PopCap, who had shown such skill in reaching a wide audience, what did? They shipped Bejeweled Blitz. They locked in the timed version, which was in no way what made the game succeed. In fact, EA's handling of PopCap's properties is rather odd. But let's not go there. Here is a game you might not associate with the luck motive. And if we were talking about Counter-Strike 1.6, which is personally my favorite Counter-Strike, that's not a game about luck at all, right? But CSGO is. Why? Shout out if you know why CSGO. Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. Loot boxes. So you can win this incredibly rare skin that you can sell on the Steam marketplace for 100 euros, right? That is the business model that CSGO runs on. And not just CSGO, of course. I mean, something like Clash Royale, right, is playing on the luck motive. Or all of these chests. Get more chests. Wait some time, get some chests. Pay some money, get some chests. Chest, money, money, money. Yeah. Not to mention, of course, Magic the Gathering, which in some respects really kicked off this successful monetization of luck, right? One of these booster packs contains a card I can sell for $100. Yeah, so let's spend $600 looking for it. Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I shouldn't mock. I have a box of Magic the Gathering cards because I was playing in the early days. It's worth, I had to value my possessions for insurance. It's worth like $10,000, my collection of Magic cards. It's insane. Anyway, look, this way to win without having to endure anything. There's lots of ways to use it. You can use it to make money. It's not the only way to use it, right? And players won't necessarily respect you if you use it either, so bear that in mind. And then thrill-seeking. This thrill-seeking motive is closely tied to luck. There's always a bit of excitement in the luck, right? So thrill-seeking motive, fast-paced excitement or risk-reward play that raises the stakes, right? And then there's this horror motive. I'll come to that in a moment. But first of all, excitement. Excitement is the emotion we associate with adrenaline. Adrenaline's actually a little bit more complicated than that. But pure excitement is something that everyone enjoys, right? And nothing has really shown this off more than Tetris, right? Yes, there are modes of Tetris you win, but actually what people enjoy most about playing Tetris is that experience of being in the flow, right? Of that consciousness destroying, desperately trying to get those tiles into the pattern, right? You're not thinking about it, you're just doing it. It was enormously good fun for an enormously wide audience, and it's exciting because there's a constant pressure to it. We talked about Bejeweled removing the time pressure. Tetris creates time pressure, excitement. But also the excitement of a fast car that the Need for Speed was making good money out of 10, 15 years ago. But also the excitement and the risk reward of something like PlayerUnknown or Fortnite, another huge money-making game. Obviously, lots of other motives in play, but that sense that there are 100 people and you're one of them, and you'll get knocked out time and time and time again, but while you're in the game is the excitement that you might last to the last 3, to the last 2, to win a victory royale, right? That excitement, that risk-reward comes with the fact that there are 100 players, and when you die, you're knocked out. And then we get to the horror motive. Now, I said adrenaline for thrill-seeking. Adrenaline is also behind fear. It's the same chemical. There's a little tiny almond-shaped piece of your brain called the amygdala that decides whether or not you actually should be scared or not. And if you're not scared, exciting. If you are scared, run away, or pretend to run away, right? Fear and disgust. The horror motive invites us to take a dark trip into negative experiences such as fear and disgust, right? And there are loads of games that play on this. Most famously, and in some respects, most indicative of the form, Resident Evil, although the first one is hard to look at without laughing at the live-action footage that they included in it. But as a franchise, it does a brilliant job of playing with fear, and one of the things it does is it makes its game design enhance your fear, because it limits your ammunition, it limits your heals, right? So you're afraid to fight, yeah? Even more so in the early Silent Hills. In fact, this is a game primarily, Silent Hill 2 here, about running away. You don't need to fight anything in that game. You can run away from everything. And that's the experience, that's the horror motive. But you also have it in something recent, something like Last of Us plays on the horror motive very heavily, right? It's really making you into a pants-wetting fool, right? That's the game that's being played. But the great thing about the horror motive is you don't have to have the budget of The Last of Us to give the player that experience. And there's a thriving run of indie games, things like Five Nights at Freddy's and Outlast, that play on the horror motive cheaply, And you can do it because this is an experience that not every player wants, but the players who want that experience of horror, they seek out the games that do it well. So if you're an indie dev looking for an angle and you like horror, it's not a bad way to go. There's a built-in audience, it's a niche audience, but you can make it work for you, and plenty of indie devs have. Social motive. Bond with other players through cooperative play or friendly competition. Now, the emotions of this motive, on the one hand, amusement, laughter. You don't have to be with other people to laugh, but you'll laugh more often and more freely and more deeply if you're with other people, right? Especially in the pub. The Slovakian pubs, even the Slovakians laugh in the pub. Yeah? Should make that an adage. You should translate that into Slovak and stick it on the flag of the nation. And also, Schadenfreude, the pleasure you take in the misfortune of others. And there's a video game artifact that sums up Schadenfreude perfectly, and it's the blue shell, right? Your friend is way in the lead. Oh, I'm going to win. Nothing can stop me now. And you're at the back, but oh, you just got that blue shell. And oh, how sweet it feels when your friend runs off the road after being hit with the blue shell and you soar past him, right? Schadenfreude. But it's got to be friendly, right? We're not talking about trolling here. We're talking about friendly competition. All the Mario Kart games are rich in this. And they work best, I think, in the same room. They work best in a split-screen setup or with multiple DSs. And it's so successful as this franchise that, as you can see here, Nintendo was able to have 3 separate SKUs out at the same time, all selling millions of units. Brilliant, successful franchise for them. And of course, all of those big multiplayer shooters that you really shouldn't be trying to compete with because you do not have millions in marketing, also play on the social motive. They play on putting lots of players together. They like to get you to form teams that you're going to play with so you can get that experience, and they want you to play against other people so that you can get that satisfaction of really taking them out in amusing and embarrassing ways. But also something trivial and friendly like Words with Friends, another hit for Zynga, right? It's that social motive putting you into friendly competition with other people. And then also something like Pokemon Go, which is past its heyday now, but at its peak, this was getting people who perhaps never left their sweaty dark dungeon of a room to go out down the street and congregate with other players of games in order to chase Pokemon out in the world. It was really quite special for those first couple of years that it ran, and also made a ton of money. Right, we've worked our way through the middle and round the left-hand side to social. I've got the whole of the right-hand side to finish up with, because there's some interesting stuff here that I want to single out. So let's go to the curiosity motive, to explore and wonder about what might be hidden from view or yet to come. And the emotions that go with this motive, in the first place, is curiosity. Not every emotions researcher considers curiosity an emotion, but whether it's an emotion or a mental state doesn't really matter for our purposes. It's something that motivates you in games. And it comes with another feeling, wonder. Right? Kids get at that way more easily than we adults do, right? But that experience is there, and it's a full body emotion. It's really powerful. I said I was going to come back to that shot in Shadow of the Colossus. There's wonder in that experience. It's mixed with fear, and wonder mixed with fear is what we call awe, right? Holy moly, I have to take that down, right? It's a mixture of fear and wonder, and it's very powerful, very powerful. But you don't need the fear. We mostly get a lot of wonder into our video games via bosses, but there's games that don't. The Endless Ocean games are incredibly good at giving you a sense of wonder when you run into a whale, or in this case, a whale shark. And it plays music that says, don't worry, you're not threatened by this giant creature. This is just a wonderful, magical moment we want to give you, right? And it's very powerful. Of course, you want to have to go diving before you can get there. My wife is so scared of drowning that she couldn't even imagine. This is a horror game for her. But it's a wonder game for me. But perhaps the quintessential curiosity motive game franchise is yet another Nintendo franchise. Yes, I'm horribly biased towards Nintendo. Please forgive me. They're just really good at what they do. Zelda, and particularly this most recent Zelda, Breath of the Wild, it is so good at eliciting curiosity and wonder. right? It's really effective at it. The landscape, and it's not the only game to do this, but it's very good at it. The landscape is sculpted so there is something wondrous, something curious around every corner. There are things that you will see half out of your eye that you'll want to ride over and investigate or fly over and investigate, right? The entire world is built to furnish your curiosity. Even the soundtrack of the Zelda games plays into this curiosity. Open a chest. What's inside? Aha! It's this thing. Okay, that's not as exciting as you thought it would be, but there was still that moment. What's in the chest? Right? Nobody's really excited in getting 100 rupees, but it could have been something good. But Minecraft does it too, right? When you play Minecraft for maybe the first year, it's incredibly interesting to dig into the ground and find enormous caverns or find cities and lost temples, right? I think after a while, it wears off, but that'll happen with any game. But Minecraft also has another trick up its sleeve, which is it gives tools to its players to create their own experiences of wonder and amazement, right? I'm sure you've all seen things like calendars made out of things that you can't believe people made in Minecraft, right? Wonder. And Roblox does it too, right? Roblox compels its players with the promise that even if you're not enjoying the game you're playing right now, there's 100 others that might interest you afterwards. And that sense of curiosity about what's out there, about what other players have made, pushes you on. And curiosity also appears in more modest games, the hidden object games like Gardens of Time, right? There's a sense of curiosity in searching the field for these different objects. It's very compelling. In fact, hidden object games are one of a very few number of genres, or the vast majority of players, and certainly the vast majority of players who pay money for them, are female. This is a really strong female market that was uncovered. But also, this sense of curiosity and wonder thrives other things that borrow from what we do in games, because what we do in games is so good, other companies must make money from it. And YouTube, Google's behemoth, is a great example of this, right? There's always another video just around the corner to make your jaw drop and go, what the, right? It's what it's trading on. It's trading on your curiosity. It's trading on your wonder. This is a really powerful tool set that games can use that is often underutilized. Not enough people make use of this motive. And then we've got, the terrible two. Narrative and agency. I am known in some respects as a game writer, so these two are close to my heart. The narrative motive, engage with a fictional world or with characters and events that build to a climax. And the agency motive, to assert the player's capacity to have an effect within the world of the game. And they're in horrific conflict with each other, right? Because when you're drawing someone in with the narrative motive, you're trying to build a story that's going to come to a satisfying conclusion. And the player will get in the way of that if you let them. It's why so many games that push down the narrative route actually are animated movies with a game cut with them, right? It's way harder to make these two work together, and I've struggled and wrestled with this problem quite a lot in the games that I've worked on. But the great thing about the narrative motive is you can get any and all emotions this way, right? As long as you set up the story well and the player doesn't get alienated from your story, every feeling you can possibly evoke is there to be had. And in some respects, the Japanese RPGs are the king of this form of, let's make an animated movie that you play little things in between of. And then we'll convince you that these two things are deeply connected, even though most of what you're doing in the playable sections is murderizing ethnic minorities for experience points. But it doesn't matter. It works. Western RPGs, and Skyrim is a great example, work on a slightly different basis. Yes, they still have a story, but they aren't prioritizing the narrative over the agency. They're prioritizing the agency over the narrative. And the clash between the Japanese and Western computer role-playing games is primarily about this split. Are we mostly giving you a story and pretending to give you agency within it? Or are we mostly pretending to give you agency with a story to keep you going? Yeah? Both techniques work, although I tell you, it's much more expensive to make an animated movie and a game than to just make a game. BioShock is another example of a game that really pushes the boat out on its narrative, right? Works really hard. It's a great example of the form. I actually hated playing it, but the story is really good, right? Sometimes games are like that, right? Sometimes a game just rubs you up the wrong way, but you can still admire it for what it does. Actually, Silent Hill 2 that I put in before, I hated it when I first played it. It took me a long time to realize that I admired it. But also, you can play with narrative and agency in a way that's very, very different from conventional storytelling. Games like Animal Crossing, Nintendogs, The Sims, right? There's a narrative here. These things are building to a climax. In The Sims, you work hard so that your little Sim family can move into their dream home that you build at the beginning of the game. That's clever, right? You've got a lot of agency building a dream home, and then that becomes the framework of the story of the game. Nintendogs is the story of looking after puppies. Oh, right? Okay, super cute. It sells on the super cute. But it's also telling its own little story. But the thing with agency is really, really difficult because we only ever sell players the illusion of agency, right? Because we can't make a game you can do everything. Actually, you can. It's called a tabletop role-playing game. I recommend them. Right? You do whatever you like in a tabletop role-playing game, more or less. It's because you don't have to build the assets for anything that's going to happen in them. But in video games, to give the player that sense of autonomy, to give them the illusion that they have control in the game world, you run the risk once again of getting confused, right? So I mentioned Skyrim there, earlier Elder Scrolls games, Morrowind in particular. Players who really love agency in video games loved Morrowind for the sense of freedom it gave you, but many, many players were just like, what am I supposed to be doing, right? So from Oblivion, and certainly in Skyrim, they took the model from somewhere else, from open world games like the later versions of the GTA franchise, which solved the clash between autonomy and confusion by being quite clear about what you were supposed to do. There is a waypoint. Go there and something will happen, right? Here is my plot summary of every GTA game ever. Go to the waypoint. Something will happen, right? But it works. Players are less confused by that, right? It's a foolproof way of mounting your story in a game that seems to say, go anywhere and do anything. Oh yeah, go anywhere and do anything, but the story's not going to advance until you go to that waypoint. But it works. It works brilliantly. And Assassin's Creed is coming down the same line. And all these open world games, which are enormously expensive, are actually, I'm going to be nationalistic for a change. These are a British invention. They're a British invention because the games that first experimented with these techniques were all made in the UK between 1984 and 1985. There are 4 in particular: Elite, Paradroid, Lords of Midnight, and Mercenary. I'm sure you've heard of Elite, even if you haven't heard of the others. Well, Elite and Paradroid in particular enormously inspired DMA Design, who made Grand Theft Auto, right? They looked at this and said, that's what we want to do. But we want to do it in a game where you can murder prostitutes with guns, right? So this is how they made GTA. They looked at how Elite gave this sense of an open world, of a freedom to act, and they made it in another form. And then they got big, and then they got bought by a US conglomerate, because that's what happens. And that's what happens when your games industry is an innovator in games and your government does nothing to defend against other countries coming and buying all your companies. Take heed. In 20, 30 years' time, Slovaks are going to be an even bigger force to be reckoned with in games than they are now. And the people running those companies are going to be very, very tempted to sell out when the big pot of cash comes, right? You need to get your governments to care about games as an industry and as a creative form, and that is happening. In fact, can I mention that you met with the government yesterday, Pete? Well, I just did. Yeah. It takes work. It takes work to make a government to care. These are the 10 player motives, right? These are the 10 most important commercial reasons that players play video games. And you can use all of these, and you can use them in different ways. But before I finish for today, I want to give you an 11th motive that is not commercially important. In fact, I'm going to give you an 11th motive that is practically commercial suicide. Do not go here if you wish to get paid. This 11th motive is what I like to call the aesthetic motive, or the art motive, to engage in an aesthetic experience of art that exceeds the limitations of mere entertainment, right? Examples. This one, I expect everyone in the audience is too young to remember. Deus Ex Machina, nothing to do with Deus Ex. Okay, very different game. Deus Ex Machina is a batshit crazy game on the Spectrum and the Commodore 64 in which you go through playable experiences recapitulating the 7 ages of man. It's nonsense, but it's brilliant nonsense. It's wildly inventive. It should never have been made, right? I'm sure it didn't make a lot of money for the person who made it, but it's incredibly inventive. It was not like nothing else ever made. 2005, Tale of Tales, a Belgian company, got money from the Belgian Arts Council to make a game called The Endless Forest. You probably don't know about it, but it was hugely influential in convincing people that there was such a thing as an art game. It certainly helped me get convinced. And even if you don't know that game, I bet you know Journey, that game company's Journey, which was directly inspired by it. 2012, Dear Esther. Interesting, because so many people say of Dear Esther, it's not a game. Well, give it to your granny and see if she can get anywhere in it, because I bet she can't, right? So it uses FPS controls, right? What will happen if you give it to your granny is she will slide slowly into the sea and learn nothing about the ghost story that is Dear Esther, right? This subversion, this playing with expectations is what art does, and Dear Esther is a brilliant example. It's a ghost story. It's a ghost story for people who know how to kill people with guns and now have to deal with the hardest challenge of all. You haven't got a gun, right? Likewise, Proteus. Proteus is probably my favorite game of this century. I absolutely love this. This is a game about doing nothing but wandering around an island, listening to and watching the island, and it's all in relatively low-res graphics, but it is so, so beautiful. I'm sure I shouldn't confess to this, but I cried at the beauty of some of the moments that Proteus gave me. I found it so moving. Your mileage may vary, but I had an absolutely brilliant time with this experience. It's like nothing else that's out there. It's hugely creative. If there was any justice in the games industry, it would have made millions. I can tell you, it didn't. Of course it didn't. It's an art game. And one more Tale of Tales game, Sunset. Now, Sunset presents itself as if it's a narrative game, but the narrative isn't what makes this interesting. This is a gallery game. This is a game about placing artworks in an apartment and watching them under different lighting conditions. Because every day in the game takes place in an hour of sunset, and the colors in the walls change over that hour, and every artwork looks different, right? It is a wild experience. I heartily recommend it. If you have ever been to an art gallery and enjoyed the experience, play Sunset as a gallery simulator, right? There's nothing else like it. I'm so disappointed that Michael and Araya, A Tale of Tales, after the commercial failure of Sunset, which they put a lot of money into, decided they weren't going to make games anymore. I thought, that is really, really sad. But in the games that they did make, they made a powerful statement for what games as a medium could be. And I want to go back, to finish, to Shadow of the Colossus, right? Because here's the thing about Shadow of the Colossus. That came out in 2005. That's the same year as Tale of Tales Endless Forest. We focused on the Fiero, the triumph, when you down the Colossus. But actually, that is not what this sequence in this game quite does. Because when you kill the Colossus, the music doesn't, as it would in a Zelda or other similar game, it doesn't go, you've won, you're awesome, you killed the big monster. No, the music says, what have you done? Are you sure you're meant to do that? You killed something really unique and interesting. You might come to regret that, right? The music doesn't celebrate the victory there. It makes it ambivalent. And that, again, it's subverting expectations. That's what art does. It subverts expectations. And Shadow of the Colossus is a wildly more commercial game than the others I gave, but it's still playing on this aesthetic motive, right? It's playing with what a game can be. So by all means, take from this talk the commercial value of these 10 motives. Please do. I want you to go and make games. I want you to make money doing games. I want the Slovak games community to grow and grow until you are buying American companies because Americans have forgotten how to do anything good, which feels like it's only a couple of years away, right? Please do that. But also, always, always, always remember that at the heart of everything we do in games, we are participating in an art form. And we're not a young art form. Don't let them mislead you. They'll say, oh, video games are so young. No, games. Games are not young. Games are 6,000 years old. When they dug up the burnt city in Iran, what did they find? They found dice. They found board game fragments. Games are older, way older than movies, older than novels, older than theatre. They are amongst the oldest art form we have. Only poetry is older, right? We are part of an art form that has the bizarre claim to fame of being 6,000 years old, but only in the last 10 years have we recognized that it's an art form, right? And now we know we've found an art form. Now we're in a position to really make incredible things for people to play. I hope in some small way what I presented today helps you go out and make incredible games. It's one of the greatest feelings in the world. It's beyond victory. Thank you.
Thank you for inspiring motives and victory, explaining us. If you have any questions,
filling the slots before lunch. Yes,
we'll get there. If you have any questions, please use Slido.
Or stick your hand up.
Stick your hands up.
I like humans, so yeah, by all means, stick your hand up and I'll talk to you. Is that it? Yes, a human with a hand.
Just scream, I guess.
How on earth have I managed to work on so many games? Excellent question. Right. I think the answer to that question is I was too lazy to set up a game developer. So instead, I set up a services company where I could take the skills that I had and pimp them out to anyone who needed them. Right? But because I did that, because I set up a services company, eventually people started working with me, Peter started working with me, other clients started working with me. And the thing is, I'm kind of cheating when I show how many games I've made because many of those games I have worked from beginning to end on, but many of them we might have worked a month on, right? Because we'll get brought in as troubleshooters. A game will hit a problem moment, right? And the publisher will say, oh no, this is clearly broken. And we're all too tired and you know, we've crunched for 6 weeks, we don't know what to do. So they'd send up a distress flare and in we come and we look at the build and we listen to the problems and we suggest ways around it, right? And we're not the kind of consultants who come in and tell you, this is what you must do, because it's never that easy in games. We come in and say, here's what we think is wrong, here are things we might try to fix it, but we totally separate those two things. The things that are wrong are what we can tell you with some confidence. But how to fix it, that's for the developer to work out. And all we'll do there is say, here's how we would fix it, but the team has to do it. And I think developing that is the reason we've ended up working on so many games, right? Because many experts are trying to pretend that they know everything. Well, no one knows everything, right? All we're trying to do is say, we've done this a lot, we've got instincts, and we're willing to help. So that, I think, is the answer to that question, which is a great question. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Anyone with a hand? You, sir, you have a hand.
Yeah, I'm Martin. I have this question that you mentioned brilliant ideas, and I think, I'm thinking how to keep the emotions going in the game development when you have, let's say, management going through your ideas, and what's your thing in it? Like, how do you keep them in one place and not change?
Okay. Those are two brilliant questions, because the first question is, how do you keep the idea alive? How do you keep the idea going, right? And the other idea is, how do you stop the bastards from grinding you down, right? So the larger the project, the more stakeholders, the more meetings, the more tedious, right? If you can't the easiest way to avoid that is to stay small, right? But if you're in it to make money and if you're in it to make your mark, you eventually get big and then you can't avoid the meetings. So there's an inevitable drag there. I won't say that there isn't, and it's very, very difficult. And staying involved in the game is really tricky. And one of the things that I would say, and this ties to your other point, that you need to get by it, is what Peter actually said in his talk. It's about having a vision holder who in that project, no matter where you are, sees the value of where you're going, right? That's the easiest way to fend off against the total collapse of morale of the team. Somebody on the project has to believe in it. They have to see where you're going, even if where you're going changes one week to the next, and it's game development, so it always does, right? That is the only advice I can give you, is that at least one member of your team has to always, always, always believe in what you're doing, yeah? If you can get that, and especially if you can get that with someone who can share that experience with the rest of the team, then you'll get there, right? You'll get through the tough times.
And maybe just one more if I can.
Go ahead.
How do you like explain those values? Maybe you mentioned like how do you keep on explaining them and not get like tired of that just trying to get them into that because maybe they can't.
Yeah, okay. So the answer to that is you don't, right? Because the thing is, you all volunteered to come and listen to me ramble on for an hour, right? You were open to what I had to say, even though really you had no idea what I was going to talk about, did you? Nobody here really knew what I was going to be talking about. But you can't then go and lecture other people and say, no, because they don't care, right? And they don't need to care. All you need to do is think about what I've asked you to think about and make it your own, right? Because you don't have to take my ideas and pass them on to other people. All you have to do is start thinking differently, because I've shared a different mindset with you, and then bring that different mindset to other people. Because the thing is, I've given you lots of different ways of thinking about these motives, but actually, you knew every one of those motives, right? I didn't tell you about experiences in games you didn't already know about. I just made it sound like I knew what I was talking about, right? You knew every one of those motives. You'd had those experiences. And the other people you work with will have too. So once you've got the good ideas, you don't need to justify them in terms of the way I put it together. You won't need to. The good ideas will sell themselves in your team, right? Yeah? Let the truth free, it can fend for itself. I think that was St. Augustine. Wow. Brought in some religion there. Wow, I didn't expect that, did you? Any more questions from the floor? How are we doing for time, Peter?
Definitely, I think the audience likes your talk. It's the best talk.
Oh, am I ignoring the people who phoned in by robot?
I didn't write it, so I mean, definitely, we may need to consider sometimes next, maybe give awards for the
let's
best.
Have a look.
Best talks.
Best talk of game days. All right, appreciate that. Whoever sent that in, that's really appreciated. Do you think it's better to focus on a single motive, or try to get as many as possible into the design? How much money have you got? Right? I'm guessing not much. So what you should do is you should decide the experience you're trying to deliver and which of those motives work with that idea. Yeah? If you've got 10 million, yes, work in all of them. Absolutely. World of Warcraft probably has all of those motives in there somewhere, right? They got the money for it. You don't. Get the idea, get the vision of what you want to do, then work out the motives that it can not activate. What's the word I'm looking for? The motives that it will go with it. That's what it's all about. Find the idea, work out how you can make it work. Okay? So choose the motives that work for the idea you've got. What is your recently released favorite game? Oh, that's so hard. Oh, that's really harsh. Right. I'm going to have to work on that. Whoever that is, contact me via LinkedIn or over email. That will take me about a month to work out, I reckon. I will get back to you on that. Just chase me up. Do we have any more by robot, or is it just those three?
Just those three.
Excellent. Excellent. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. Thank you so much for letting me behave theatrically and nonsensically on your stage. It is an absolute pleasure to be here in Košice. I am flying out in about 3 hours, so if you do want to talk to me, come now, because there won't be another chance this trip. But Peter always grabs me back at some point, so I will be here again. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great.